2:47 a.m. TechFlow Industries' executive floor pulsed with desperate energy. Behind glass walls, Elena Morrison's voice shattered the silence. $1 billion, gone. 3 hours until total system collapse. 50 of the world's brightest engineers hunched over glowing screens, their genius crumbling against an invisible digital assassin. In the hallway, Marcus Williams moved like a ghost. Faded navy uniform, calloused hands gripping a mop handle. Water dripped steadily onto Italian marble, each drop forming something that looked almost intentional. His weathered eyes caught the cascading code through the conference room door. Just for a heartbeat, those tired eyes sharpened. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe understanding. Elena's gaze swept past the window and locked onto his for one electric second. Then Marcus turned away, resumed his quiet work, carrying a secret that could change everything. But some secrets are worth more than $1 billion. The small town of Millbrook, Ohio had never seen anything like TechFlow Industries before Elena Morrison arrived 2 years ago. She transformed an abandoned steel mill into a gleaming temple of artificial intelligence, promising to revolutionize global logistics with their Nexus system. The project was worth $1.2 billion, and it employed nearly half the town's 45,000 residents. Elena had built her reputation on turning failing companies into tech giants. But tonight felt different. Tonight, everything she had worked for was crumbling in real time, and she had no idea that salvation wore a janitor's uniform. Marcus Williams had been invisible for 3 years now. Every night from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., he moved through TechFlow's corridors like a shadow, emptying trash cans and mopping floors while the tech elite slept. He lived in a small trailer in Millbrook Estates with his 8-year-old son Tommy, surviving on $12 an hour and the knowledge that nobody looked twice at a man in a Navy jumpsuit. His MIT computer science degree hung hidden in a cardboard box beneath his bed, next to Sarah's wedding ring and medical bills he could never pay. The world had decided Marcus Williams was a criminal, a has-been, someone worth forgetting. They had no idea they were wrong about everything. The next morning arrived with deceptive calm. Marcus had just finished his shift when Elena Morrison walked through the lobby at 6:15 a.m., her Armani suit wrinkled from an all-nighter, her usually perfect hair showing signs of stress. She moved with the sharp, deliberate steps of someone running on caffeine and desperation. Marcus was wiping down the elevator buttons when she approached, her phone buzzing with what sounded like very bad news. She answered with a clipped, "Morrison," then immediately began speaking in rapid-fire technical terms that would have confused most people. Marcus understood every word. "Buffer overflow exploit through the authentication module," Elena was saying to whoever was on the other end. "Yes, I know it should be impossible. Yes, I know we've tested it 1,000 times." She ran her free hand through her hair, leaving it even more disheveled. Marcus continued cleaning, but his ears were tuned to every syllable. The attack Elena was describing was sophisticated, the kind that required inside knowledge of the system's architecture. More troubling was the fact that he recognized the signature. It was elegant, surgical, and completely devastating. It was also exactly the kind of attack he used to prevent, back when people still listened to him. Elena ended the call and sagged against the marble wall. For a moment, she looked less like a Fortune 500 CEO and more like someone who was about to lose everything. Marcus finished with the elevator and moved toward the exit, but something made him pause. Maybe it was the way Elena's shoulders shook slightly, or maybe it was the fact that 2,000 jobs hung in the balance. Either way, he found himself doing something he hadn't done in 3 years. He spoke up. "Excuse me, Ms. Morrison." His voice was quiet, respectful, almost apologetic. Elena looked up, clearly surprised that the janitor was addressing her directly. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. The buffer overflow issue you mentioned. Have your engineers tried implementing a stack canary with address space layout randomization? The words hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning two different worlds. Elena stared at him for a long moment, her executive brain trying to process why a janitor was speaking fluent cybersecurity. I'm sorry, what did you just say? Elena's voice carried a mixture of confusion and something that might have been hope. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, suddenly aware of how presumptuous he must sound. I used to work in tech. Before. He gestured vaguely at his uniform, as if it explained everything. The attack you described sounds like an advanced, persistent threat, the kind that exploits legacy authentication protocols. If your team implemented proper input validation and memory protection, it might buy you some time. Elena's phone buzzed again, but for the first time all night she ignored it. You used to work in tech, she repeated slowly. Where? Marcus shifted his mop bucket, suddenly wishing he had kept his mouth shut. Different places. Small companies mostly. Nothing like this. The lie came easily, practiced from 3 years of carefully edited truths. Elena studied his face, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing more than he wanted to show. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Tommy, Marcus's 8-year-old son, who bounded through the lobby with the endless energy of childhood. Dad, you forgot your lunch! Tommy held up a paper bag that had clearly been packed by small hands. The edges were uneven and covered in dinosaur stickers. Marcus's entire demeanor softened as he knelt to Tommy's level. Thanks, buddy. You walked here all by yourself? Tommy nodded proudly. Mom used to say I was responsible enough. Elena watched this exchange with growing interest. Tommy was small for his age, with his father's intelligent eyes and a gap-toothed grin that could have powered the building. But what caught Elena's attention was the tablet tucked under Tommy's arm. The screen showed lines of code that looked suspiciously like a simple artificial intelligence program. Did you write that? She asked, crouching down to Tommy's level. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. Dad's teaching me. I'm making a game where the computer learns to play tic-tac-toe. Want to see? Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He had been careful to keep his past buried, but Tommy's natural curiosity about programming was becoming harder to hide. Maybe another time, buddy. Ms. Morrison is very busy. But Elena was already looking at the tablet, her eyes widening as she scrolled through Tommy's code. It was simple but elegant, the kind of clean programming that came from excellent teaching. This is impressive work for someone your age, she told Tommy. Your father must be a very good teacher. That evening, Marcus arrived for his shift to find the building buzzing with even more frantic energy than the night before. The cyber attack had escalated, and Elena's team was running out of options. Marcus moved through his usual routine, but he found himself lingering near the emergency meetings, listening to fragments of conversation that painted an increasingly dire picture. The attackers had evolved their approach, adapting to every countermeasure the TechFlow engineers deployed. It was like watching a chess match where only one side knew all the rules. Around 2 a.m., Marcus was cleaning the conference room when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Someone had left papers scattered across the table, technical specifications for the Nexus system's core architecture. As he straightened the documents, his eyes caught familiar patterns in the code structure. The foundation of TechFlow's billion-dollar system was built on algorithms he had written 7 years ago at MIT. Not inspired by, not similar to, identical. Elena Morrison had built her empire on his work, and now that work was being turned against itself. Marcus sat heavily in one of the leather conference chairs, his mind racing through the implications. The attackers weren't just sophisticated. They were using his own code against him. Every vulnerabilities they exploited, every back door they slipped through, They were using techniques that existed because he had designed the original system to be elegant rather than paranoid. He had trusted that future developers would implement proper security protocols. He had been catastrophically wrong. For 3 years, Marcus had told himself that his past was dead and buried. He was just a janitor now, just a single father trying to give his son a better life than the one society had decided they deserved. But looking at these papers, watching Elena's company crumble under an attack that exploited his own brilliant naivety, he realized that some ghosts refuse to stay buried. The question was whether he had the courage to resurrect who he used to be. The next morning brought news that sent shockwaves through Millbrook. TechFlow's stock had plummeted overnight, and rumors of the company's potential bankruptcy were spreading like wildfire. Local news crews set up outside the building, their cameras capturing worried employees as they arrived for what might be their last days of work. Marcus watched from the bus stop across the street as Elena emerged from a black sedan, her face a mask of grim determination. She pushed through the reporters without comment, but Marcus could see the weight of 2,000 jobs pressing down on her shoulders. By the time Marcus arrived for his evening shift, the building felt like a funeral home. Half the lights were dimmed to save money, and the usual chatter of late-night programmers had been replaced by an oppressive silence. Elena's office was still blazing with light, and through the glass walls, Marcus could see her pacing back and forth while shouting into her phone. The gesture reminded him of a caged animal, brilliant and desperate, and running out of options. Marcus found himself taking longer routes through the building, paths that happened to pass by the technical team's workstations. What he saw there confirmed his worst fears. The engineers were throwing everything they had at the problem, but they were fighting the wrong battle. They kept trying to patch individual vulnerabilities instead of addressing the fundamental architectural flaw that made those vulnerabilities possible. It was like trying to stop a flood by plugging holes in a dam that was structurally unsound. Around midnight, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. Not code, not yet, but a detailed explanation of what was really happening to TechFlow's system. He explained how the attackers were exploiting weaknesses in the original authentication framework, how they were using advanced persistent threat techniques to maintain access even after individual exploits were patched, and most importantly, how the entire assault could be stopped with a single, elegant solution. When he finished writing, Marcus stared at the paper for a long time. Signing his name would mean revealing who he really was, and that was a risk he wasn't ready to take. Instead, he folded the paper carefully and slipped it under Elena's office door with a simple note attached. From someone who understands your enemy. Then he went back to mopping floors, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his already ruined life. Elena found the paper at 6 a.m. when she finally stumbled out of her office for more coffee. The technical explanation was brilliant, written by someone who clearly understood not just the current attack, but the fundamental architecture of the Nexus system. More puzzling was the handwriting, neat, precise, and strangely familiar. She had seen this particular script somewhere before, but exhaustion was making her memory fuzzy. What mattered was that whoever had written this note might be TechFlow's last hope. The solution described in the anonymous note worked perfectly. By implementing the suggested countermeasures, Elena's team managed to stop the immediate bleeding and buy themselves precious time. But the mystery of who had written it gnawed at Elena throughout the day. Someone in her building understood her system better than her own engineers, and they were choosing to remain anonymous. The implications of that were both thrilling and terrifying. That evening, Elena made an unprecedented decision. Instead of going home to her empty penthouse apartment, she decided to stay in the building and observe. She wanted to see who moved through TechFlow's corridors after hours, who might have the knowledge and access necessary to leave such a perfectly crafted solution on her desk. She positioned herself in the executive lounge where she could watch the building's main arteries without being easily spotted. What she saw surprised her. Marcus Williams, the quiet janitor who had spoken to her about cybersecurity protocols, worked with an unusual precision. He didn't just clean, he observed. His eyes tracked the security monitors, noted which workstations had been left active, and seemed to catalogue every detail of the building's technical infrastructure. Most tellingly, his path through the building formed a perfect surveillance route that would allow him to monitor all of TechFlow's critical systems without appearing to do anything more than his job. Around 2 a.m., Elena watched Marcus pause outside the main server room. The door was locked with both keycard and biometric security, but Marcus studied the access panel with the intense focus of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. After a moment, he pulled out his phone and took a picture of the security logs displayed on the panel's screen. It was a subtle action, easily missed, but Elena caught it. More importantly, she recognized it as the behavior of someone conducting professional reconnaissance. Elena made her decision. She stepped out of the shadows and walked directly toward Marcus, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Marcus turned at the sound, and for a moment, Elena saw something flicker across his face. Not surprise, but resignation, as if he had been expecting this confrontation. "We need to talk," Elena said simply. Marcus nodded slowly, setting down his mop bucket. "I suppose we do." They found themselves in the same conference room where Marcus had first seen the Nexus specifications. Elena spread the anonymous note across the table between them, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "Did you write this?" she asked. Marcus stared at the paper for a long moment, his weathered hands folded carefully in his lap. "What makes you think I did?" His voice was steady, but Elena could hear the exhaustion underneath. "Because," Elena said, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday morning, about buffer overflows and authentication protocols. And I realized that your explanation wasn't the kind of general knowledge someone picks up from working in tech at small companies. It was specific, detailed, and exactly right. The kind of knowledge that comes from designing systems like this." She paused, studying his reaction. "So I did some research into Marcus Williams, and what I found was very interesting." Marcus felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. "I think you might have me confused with someone else." But even as he said it, he knew the game was over. Elena was too smart, too persistent, and too desperate to let this go. "Marcus Williams," Elena continued, "graduated summa cum laude from MIT with a degree in computer science, specialized in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, worked for several major tech companies before joining Hextech Solutions as a senior systems architect." Her voice was calm, almost conversational, but Marcus could hear the steel underneath. "That Marcus Williams," Elena said, "was arrested 3 years ago for allegedly hacking into his own company's servers and stealing proprietary algorithms. He served 18 months in federal prison for corporate espionage and was released with a criminal record that made him unemployable in the tech industry." Elena leaned forward. "The same Marcus Williams who apparently died in a car accident 6 months after his release. Except here you are, very much alive, working as a janitor in a building that runs on systems you could have designed in your sleep." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Marcus stared at his hands, thinking about all the ways this conversation could end, none of them good. Finally, he looked up and met Elena's eyes. "That Marcus Williams was framed," he said quietly. "He spent 18 months in prison for a crime he didn't commit, watching his wife die of cancer while he was locked away, unable to help or even hold her hand. When he got out, he found that the tech industry had no use for a convicted felon, no matter how brilliant he might have been. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. Framed by whom? But even as she asked the question, she was afraid she already knew the answer. Marcus's smile was bitter and exhausted. By his former colleague at Hex Tech Solutions, a brilliant, ambitious woman who needed someone to take the fall for a security breach that happened on her watch, someone whose reputation could be sacrificed to save her own. The recognition hit Elena like a physical blow. 3 years ago, at Hex Tech Solutions, there had been a massive security breach that threatened to destroy the company. Elena had been the vice president of development, responsible for the team that built the compromised system. When the board demanded accountability, she had pointed them toward Marcus Williams, the brilliant but socially awkward engineer who had designed the original architecture. It had been easy to make him look guilty. His access to the systems, his intimate knowledge of their vulnerabilities, his inability to explain complex technical concepts in simple terms. "You were there," Marcus continued, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. "Hex Tech Solutions. You were the one who told the board that I had been acting suspicious, that I had been accessing systems outside my normal responsibilities. You provided the evidence that convinced them I was the insider threat they were looking for." Elena's face had gone pale, but Marcus wasn't finished. "The ironic part is that you were right about one thing. I was accessing systems outside my normal responsibilities. I was trying to fix the security vulnerability that eventually got exploited. I just didn't do it fast enough." Elena felt the full weight of what she had done settling on her shoulders like lead. 3 years ago, she had destroyed an innocent man's life to save her own career. She had sent him to prison, cost him his wife, his home, his future, all to avoid taking responsibility for her own team's failures. And now, that same man was sitting across from her in a janitor's uniform, having just saved her company with his anonymous expertise. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered, but the words felt pathetically inadequate. Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm sure you are. But sorry doesn't bring back my wife. Sorry doesn't give me back the 3 years I lost. Sorry doesn't erase Tommy's nightmares about why Daddy went away." His voice remained calm, but Elena could see the pain underneath, carefully controlled but still razor-sharp. "Why?" Elena asked deep-down. "Why did you help us? Why did you write that note?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Because 2,000 people work in this building. 2,000 families depend on TechFlow for their survival. Tommy goes to school with their children. I see their faces every day in this town." He gestured around the conference room. "What you did to me was personal. What's happening to TechFlow affects everyone I care about." Elena stared at Marcus, trying to reconcile the gentle janitor she had spoken with that morning with the brilliant engineer whose life she had destroyed. "The attack on our system," she said slowly. "Do you know who's behind it?" Marcus nodded grimly. "David Chen. He was my partner at Hextech, worked on the original authentication protocols with me. When I was arrested, he disappeared. Looks like he's been planning his revenge ever since." "Revenge against you?" Elena asked. Marcus shook his head. "Revenge against you. David knew I was innocent. He tried to speak up during the investigation, but the evidence against me was too compelling. When I went to prison, he blamed himself for not fighting harder. Now he's using my own code to destroy the company built by the woman who framed me. It's poetic, in a very twisted way." Elena felt sick. "How do we stop him?" Marcus smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We don't. I do. David's using techniques I taught him, exploiting vulnerabilities in code I wrote. He's fighting a war with weapons I designed. The only person who can beat him is the person who created those weapons in the first place." He stood up, straightening his Navy uniform. "The question is whether you're willing to let a convicted felon save your company." Elena looked at Marcus for a long moment, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the janitor, not the criminal the justice system had labeled him, but the brilliant engineer whose life she had destroyed and who was somehow still willing to help her. "What do you need?" she asked. Marcus pulled a small, battered USB drive from his pocket. "Access to your primary servers, administrative privileges, and about 47 seconds. Elena led Marcus to TechFlow's main server room, her keycard and biometric scan granting them access to the heart of the company's digital infrastructure. The room hummed with the quiet power of millions of calculations per second, server racks standing like monoliths in the climate-controlled environment. Marcus moved with the confident familiarity of someone returning home after a long absence. He plugged his USB drive into the primary terminal and began typing with a speed and precision that made Elena realize just how much talent she had been watching waste away in a janitor's uniform. Lines of code scrolled across the screen faster than she could follow, but Marcus's fingers never hesitated. He was writing a surgical counterattack, exploiting the same vulnerabilities David Chen was using, but turning them back against the attacker. David always preferred brute force solutions, Marcus said without looking up from the keyboard. Elegant in their own way, but they leave signatures. He's been patient, building his attack over months, but he got overconfident, left himself exposed through the same back doors he's been using to access our system. Marcus's fingers flew across the keys, implementing code that seemed to write itself. The beautiful thing about using someone's own weapons against them is that you know exactly where they hurt the most. Elena watched in fascination as Marcus's counterattack unfolded across multiple monitors. He wasn't just stopping David's assault, he was systematically dismantling it, tracing every connection back to its source and severing them one by one. It was like watching a master surgeon remove a cancer, precise and methodical and absolutely devastating to the malignancy. 43 seconds after Marcus began typing, every screen in the server room flashed green. System integrity restored, attack neutralized, threat eliminated. Marcus leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes, suddenly looking every one of his 35 years. "It's over," he said simply. "David's locked out permanently, and the vulnerabilities he was exploiting have been patched. Your system is actually more secure now than it was before the attack." Elena stared at the screens in amazement. $1.2 billion, she said quietly. "You just saved $1.2 billion in 43 seconds. Marcus nodded absently, already shutting down his workstation and pocketing the USB drive. "I should get back to my rounds. The night shift isn't over yet." But Elena caught his arm as he moved toward the door. "Marcus," she said, "I can't let you go back to being a janitor. Not after this. I'm offering you the position of Chief Technology Officer, full equity stake, complete exoneration, anything you want." Marcus looked at her with something that might have been pity. "I don't want your guilt money, Elena. I don't want to be the person I was before. That person trusted the wrong people and paid a price he couldn't afford." "Then what do you want?" Elena asked desperately. Marcus considered the question carefully. "I want you to create a program for hiring people with criminal records. People who made mistakes, people who were wrongfully convicted, people who deserve a second chance but can't get one because of their past. I want you to look beyond the background checks and see the potential." He paused. "And I want you to make me the head of that program. Not CTO, not some executive position. Just a chance to help people like me rebuild their lives." Elena nodded slowly. "And if I do that, Will you consider staying on as a technical consultant? We could use your expertise, and you could work on your own terms." Marcus smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "I'll think about it. But right now, I need to finish my shift and get home to Tommy. He has school in the morning, and I promised to help him with his programming homework." 3 months later, TechFlow Industries announced the launch of their Second Chance initiative, a groundbreaking program that provided employment opportunities for individuals with criminal records. The program was featured in national news as a model for rehabilitation-focused hiring, and companies across the country began implementing similar policies. Elena Morrison was praised for her innovative leadership, but she always made sure to credit the program's real architect, Marcus Williams, Director of Community Integration. Marcus kept his small trailer in Millbrook Estates, but TechFlow's Employee Assistance Program helped him upgrade to a modest house with a yard where Tommy could play. The boy thrived in his new environment, making friends with other children whose parents worked at TechFlow and continuing to develop his programming skills under his father's patient guidance. Marcus's work at TechFlow was fulfilling in ways his previous career had never been. Instead of just writing code, he was changing lives. Elena and Marcus never became friends exactly, but they developed a professional relationship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Elena had learned to see past job titles and criminal records to recognize true talent, while Marcus had discovered that forgiveness could coexist with consequences. They worked together to build something better than either could have created alone. The USB drive that had saved TechFlow found a place of honor in Marcus's new office, mounted in a simple frame with a small plaque that read, "For whoever needs a second chance next." The office itself was modest, practical, and absolutely nothing like the executive suite Elena had originally offered him. It was exactly what Marcus Williams wanted, a place where he could do meaningful work without having to pretend to be someone he wasn't. On quiet evenings, when the building was empty except for the night security staff, Marcus would sometimes walk through TechFlow's corridors and remember what it felt like to be invisible. He would think about the person he had been before prison, before Sarah's death, before he learned that the world could be arbitrarily cruel to people who didn't deserve it. That person was gone, and Marcus didn't miss him. The man he had become was stronger, kinder, and infinitely more aware of what really mattered. Tommy Williams was 9 years old now, tall for his age and brilliant in the way that came from having a father who encouraged questions and celebrated curiosity. He had friends, a stable home, and a future that stretched ahead of him full of possibility. When people asked him what his father did for work, Tommy would say with pride that his dad helped people who had made mistakes learn how to make better choices. It was, Tommy had decided, the most important job in the world. The story of Marcus Williams and Elena Morrison became part of TechFlow's company culture, told and retold as an example of what could happen when people chose to see potential instead of problems. New employees learned about the night shift janitor who saved the company, and about the CEO who had the courage to admit her mistakes and try to make them right. It wasn't a perfect story. Some wounds never fully heal, and some consequences can't be undone. But it was a true story, and that made it more valuable than any fairy tale. Late at night, when Marcus finished his consulting work and headed home to Tommy, he would sometimes pause in the building's lobby and look up at the floors above. Somewhere in those offices, other people were working late, solving problems, building futures. Some of them were second-chance employees who had found purpose and stability through the program he had helped create. Others were engineers and executives and administrators, all working together to create something larger than themselves. Marcus would think about David Chen sometimes, wondering what had become of his former partner after the counterattack had traced his location and led to his arrest. The justice system had been swifter and more certain with David than it had been with Marcus, perhaps because David's guilt was unambiguous, while Marcus's innocence had required more faith than the system was willing to extend. It was a bitter irony, but Marcus had learned to live with bitter ironies. What mattered more was Tommy's laughter echoing through their small house, the satisfaction of helping someone find work after months of rejection, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference. Marcus Williams had learned that redemption wasn't about returning to who you used to be. It was about becoming who you were always meant to be. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that person was exactly who the world needed. The man in the faded Navy uniform had saved more than $1 billion in 43 seconds. He had saved himself, his son, and the belief that people could change, grow, and find ways to help each other despite their past mistakes. In the end, that was worth more than any amount of money, and it was a secret Marcus Williams was finally proud to carry.